What's the most horrifying how do you not know how to do this moment you've experienced with another person whilst adulting? Friend who was pushing 40 had never paid a bill before. She had gone from living with her parents to living in a dorm to living with her parents again until she got married. Then she got divorced and was living on her own for the first time. Got a text from her asking if my power was out too. Then she realized it was just her. Her excuse was she never paid attention to the bills because she thought they were receipts and that the cost was included in her rent. Her water was cut off a couple weeks later and we had to talk about that too. I'm afraid this is about to happen to my brother-in-law's Bill's soon-to-be wife. Not that they'll get divorced, but she's 33 and has never lived on her own. She's just lived with her parents her entire life, including the short time she was in college. She and my Bill are planning to marry and move her into his place next year. They got engaged earlier this year. For their engagement, she picked out a $15,000 ring and couldn't wrap her head around why Bill freaked out about it. She genuinely had no concept of how much money that is, nor any concept of what an insurance policy for jewelry looks like, or why it would be necessary for such a purchase. Her current plans for the wedding include roughly 450 guests, and she can't understand why that's not affordable. Blows me away. I know living together before marriage has only become the norm over the last few decades, but how TF do you decide to marry someone who you have no living together experience with? I had a roommate at university whose cooking method was put baked beans in a Tupperware, seal the lid, turn on microwave. When lid pops and explodes beans everywhere they're cooked. Well, this kinda blew up way more than I expected. So in light of that, I'll share another story of his cooking methods. One time I came home to find the oven on and smoking a bit. Opened the door to find what was an entire lasagne bubbling on the bottom of the oven. He bought himself a frozen lasagna. Step 1, remove outer packaging. Step 2, place on middle tray of preheated oven. He literally thought that outer packaging was anything outside of the lasagne, so he tore away that shell that the lasagne cooks in and placed it straight on the rack. So as it defrosted it just fell through the rack and all over the oven. And you can guarantee he'd refuse to clean the microwave too. You kidding? How else would he eat them? I remember when I first started dating my now husband, I was hanging out at his apartment waiting for him to get out of work. His place was a bit messy, so I decided I'd tidy up for him a bit. Fast forward to the next morning, and he comes in a little shocked. Why would you load the dishwasher like that? I had never had a dishwasher before in my life, or mayo. We are talking cups facing up, the gas pans shoved in, the whole 9 yards. Thank God he stuck with me, lol. That's actually hilarious and kind of wholesome. If you never had one you would never know. I had a college roommate who would just throw stuff in, but she did have one growing up. She was just lazy. We had a dishwasher growing up, but it was pristine. My parents just made me do the dishes instead of wasting water on the machine. 19 Yo dude, how do you cook a fried egg? Gave him instructions and left him to it. Came back a while later to ask how it went. Fine in the end, but it took a few attempts because the yolk kept breaking. What do you mean kept breaking? Well, I kept throwing them away because I thought breaking the yolk made it poisonous. Once again, he was 19 years old. Reminds me of when I was dating a 19-year dude. I explained that eating raw nuts is healthy, so he bought a bag of peanuts. He complained 2 days later that he was going to stop eating them because they upset his stomach. So I got a free bag of peanuts. Yay. He was stunned when he saw me shelling them and eating the nut because he was eating them shell and all for 2 days. Surprisingly did not end well, but I got a lot of terrible sex and dumber stories out of it. Well, don't hold out on us. What, I got one. I work as an EMT for a private company, so we mostly deal with nursing homes and the elderly. One day when I was about 6-8 months in, I got assigned a partner who was in my orientation class. He was a little older than me at the time, like mid-20s, but he seemed a little childish. Maybe he's just sheltered, I think to myself. Anyways, we got a patient I've had a few times before. She was a sweet little old lady with COPD and CHF living at an assisted living. Call was for pneumonia. She's prone to this stuff, so it wasn't a huge deal. Slap her on oxygen and keep her sitting up till we get to the hospital. The first red flag though was this kid didn't know anything. He didn't know how to take a blood pressure. He couldn't find the medical history or medication on the paperwork, which is clearly labeled. He didn't even push the stretcher, just walked next to it with a hand on it. When I asked him about all that, he said my partners usually do that for me. So, I put her on an oxygen mask and sit her all the way up, mildly agitated. I tell myself it's just one shift with this kid. He's in the back with her, and I tell him to just switch the oxygen from the bag, which is a small tank, to the main tank, which is huge, because with the amount of oxygen we are giving her, the bag will run out not even halfway before the hospital. It's about 25 minutes, which normally wouldn't be a huge deal. But when we pull up to the hospital, and I open the back doors, I'm freaking shook. The oxygen mask isn't inflated, meaning she isn't getting oxygen. She's pale as crap. I can literally see her accessory muscles moving, struggling to breathe. And this kid was sitting behind her, with a clueless half smile on his face, looks at me, and says the main tank is broken, so I left her on the bag. This woman, who needs oxygen without pneumonia, was barely breathing for at least 15 minutes. And this freaking idiot didn't even check. We take her into the hospital. I ask him to find an oxygen tank, while explain to this woman's daughter what happened. He says he doesn't know where to look. I freaking find it, and told him to talk to the daughter. When it's all said and done, I check to see what's broken. He didn't turn on the tank. Please tell me he's not an EMT anymore. This is terrifying. I never saw him again after that shift, which is rare, because we have a small base. I'm hoping he got one too many reports. He's the only partner I've ever had that I lost my patience with. Worked at an on-campus store that sold a lot of essentials for students living at dorms. I had one girl ask me what laundry detergent was, because she never did laundry. She asked if I could help her do her laundry, but I declined as I couldn't leave the register, which of course she was mad about. Sorry, I have to actually do my job, lady. In a weird way, I'm jealous of those people. I've done crap like that since I was physically able to, and I can honestly say they haven't missed much. I appreciate how, hopefully, it's shaped me into a better person, but come on, it's boring AF. I can understand. I was definitely envious of them, because it was obvious they came from money, whereas I was working 2 part-time jobs while going to college. But sadly they were also the type of girls who only went to college because everyone else did, and more than likely would just try and find someone who'd marry them only to be further pampered. I recall having a lab partner who was in a sorority who didn't know how to do laundry or cook. They paid people to do that for them. I asked her if she was interested in at least learning how to do it for the future. She replied back saying that's silly. I'm going to marry someone with money, where I'd just hire someone to do it for me. I had no response to that, since I clearly could not relate. More of a how do you not know to not do this? First year at uni, a girl in my halls is microwaving some food and left it in the metal foil container. It took 3 fire engines to put out the fire, and we had to have a new kitchen installed. Not to mention, this was at like 3 AM, and I had an exam the next day. I was not impressed. I was not impressed, is the thing that identified this to me as a fellow British person post. I can literally hear you saying it, inflections and everything. Well crap, my secret identity has been uncovered. I mean, I love hand egg and hate that soccer. Coffee is the best and tea is the worst. They'll never suspect me now. Strokes cat maniacally. I had a friend who I noticed took Mucinex a lot. I've used it occasionally when I've been congested, but it seemed abnormal how often I saw him taking it. I finally asked him why he was taking it one time, because he didn't seem sick at all, and he looked puzzled and said, well, I think I'm getting sick. I pressed further, and he said, because it's an expectorant. It turns out he thought you take an expectorant when you are expecting to get sick. That's actually pronounced analgesic, not analgesic. Sir, the pills go in your mouth. Thanks Dr. Turkleton. This is going to sound weird, but manage a budget. or just in general being money smart. One of my old roommates was really bright academically, but he was terrible with money. Each semester he would start off with a pile of cash from his parents and proceed to blow through it in about 2 months. I first noticed it with his dining dollars on campus. Every day it seemed like he would buy the most expensive sushi option on campus every day. We are talking maybe $18, which isn't terrible if it's once in a while, but this was every day. It's also college dining hall sushi, so the quality was also just okay without even considering the money spent. Of course, around midterms when his dining dollars would run out and he'd sort of panic and whine that he couldn't afford anything. But what was so strange is that when he would start to run low, he sort of laugh about not knowing any way we could avoid going broke while continuing to buy only the most expensive option. But he'd also get really defensive when people wanted to talk to him about this. Eventually when he moved off campus it was the same thing. For the first 2 months he'd feast. He'd get delivery constantly, ordering just way too much food, and of course he'd never share it. But then once he'd nearly run out of cash, he'd buy like an emergency 50 pack of hot dogs and only eat that for the rest of the semester, while telling everyone else that they were lucky they had money to spend, and how not everyone had it so easy when it comes to money. He'd never directly say it, but there were always a lot of implied insults. Do you know if he had ever had a job? He had never had a job at that point, though after graduating he eventually got one. My girlfriend, now wife, put a pan of oil on too high of heat and it hit the flash point and caught fire. She freaked out and went to get a large thing of water and I stopped her and tossed the pan lid on top until the flames went out. Then she asked me why I stopped her. I was very thankful that I was there the first time she had a grease fire. Not only could she have hurt herself, but it was in a college dorm and the whole friggin' place could have gone up. I had a grease fire not long ago. I was cooking away and the pan went alight. I was holding the pan handle. I didn't know where the lid was. I casually called in my wife. No response. Called again. She replied she was just finishing something. I was still holding a pan of fire before casually walking past her through the front door and placed it on the drive. In my head it felt like minutes had passed, but it was probably only a few seconds and my wife mocks me for how calm I was carrying a pan of fire casually through the house. I imagine Frozone's voice. Honey I, where's the lid to this pan? I have a couple. I once had my ex's parents coming over and needed some help cleaning the house up to get ready for their arrival. I asked my ex to clean the bathroom for me whilst I cleaned the kitchen and left him to it. I went in about a half an hour later and the bathroom was somehow dirtier, but the ex was sitting on the couch chilling. When I asked him why he hadn't cleaned the bathroom, he looked at me all confused and said he had. I asked him to come in and pointed out all the soap scum everywhere and how it was clearly not clean. He reiterated that he'd cleaned it. I asked him to show me how. He proceeded to pick up a bar of soap, lather up his hands real good, and just rub everything. He didn't even rinse it after. Just rubbed everything with soapy hands. And couldn't understand why I was staring at him open-mouthed. Same guy. A few months later, I asked him to mash some potatoes I'd boiled whilst I plated up dinner. He very literally did so, without draining out the water. Again, he didn't think what he'd done was in any way wrong, despite the weird texture and look of the potatoes. Why yes, I'm also a fellow human being, like yourself, a native to your planet. Your ex, probably. This explains everything. I guess we were still in high school, but we were 18. Me and my buddy Ferris were just getting into going to the gym. We went with Ferris's friend Tom. After working out in the changing room during some small talk, I saw Tom putting on a shirt. Tom put the shirt over his head, but didn't put his arms through the sleeves. He managed to pull the shirt over his torso so that it was adequately on before wiggling all about and bending his arms in odd ways to get them into the sleeves. I didn't take much notice to it the first few times, but after a few months it was apparent he did this every single time. Tom didn't know how to put on a shirt, at least efficiently. Eventually we asked Tom why he put his shirt on like that, and he said something along the lines of, "Wait, what? Don't I do it the same way you guys do?" I guess he had never really thought about it before then. I know a lot of guys that do this. I think it's more of a societal split than you realize. There is also a gender split in taking off a shirt too. Guys pull up from the shoulder. Girls invert it from the waist. I never noticed it until I started letting people try on my chainmail shirt. It weighs 15 pounds and girls, like myself, don't have any trouble getting it off by themselves. I've had to help every guy out of it though. Not sure if I'd call it horrifying, but pretty ridiculous, nonetheless. It's about me. I just moved into my first home in February of this year. I live alone and am single. Earlier this month I mowed my lawn for the first time. I have never mowed a lawn before, but I'm thinking, how hard can it be? The answer, not hard at all. Prior to that, I had roped my brother into coming over and doing it for me, but this time I figured I need to actually learn. The lawnmower is an old push mower of my dad's that he had brought over about a month ago, and he quickly gave me the rundown on how to use it, but I was half paying attention. Plus, it's a lawnmower. So anyway, I go to start it up. Takes me at least 10 tries of pulling the cord as hard as I can with no luck until finally it fires up. I then proceed to begin mowing, and I know this thing is self-propelling, it says so right on it, but I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why it's so hard to push. The wheels aren't locked or anything, so I just figure it's a combination of me not having much upper body strength and my lawn having a lot of uneven spots / divots that prevented the mower from moving smoothly. I finally finish, sweating my ass off, like I had just finished seriously working out. My yard is very small, even I finished the front and back in about a half hour 40 minutes. Upon reflection, I'm still not convinced that the mower was self-propelling. I mean, I know I'm not strong and am somewhat petite, but still. So I'm sharing this story with friends and co-workers like WTF did I do wrong? And they're all asking me about this lever, and I'm like, yeah, obviously I had to hold the lever down, or the motor kills. Well, turns out there's a second lever that you have to squeeze in order to propel the lawnmower. I manually pushed that for around my whole yard, divots, hills and all, ended up with a blister on my thumb and sweating profusely through my shirt. Not to mention the few times I stopped it and had to restart it. I pulled the cord literally at least 20 times to get it to start again. I was waiting for one of my neighbors to come over and ask me if I needed help. The struggle was that obvious. I also learned about the little button that you push a few times to make starting easier. So yeah, mowed today, and let's just say that things went significantly better than last time. Growing up, my dad or brother would mow, and in college up until now, I have always lived in apartments or duplexes, nothing that requires residents to do any lawn care. So, at the age of 32, I have finally learned to use a lawnmower. Sounds to me like you have never had to deal with a small gasoline engine before, which is okay, since they seem to be on the way out nowadays. The little button you press to make starting easier is called a priming bulb, and it basically pumps gas into the system so it's ready to go. You are lucky you didn't have to mess with the choke, though who knows, you might have, which would explain why it kept dying. Look, I ain't gonna lie, I've been using small gas engines my whole life and use them a lot at work, and all I know is that the choke helps start it when it's cold. No idea what it does, I just know I need to choke it.